Max, great to chat again.
Well, welcome, Stefan. Really looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be a fun one.
Right. So, look, as I've mentioned, I think we're going to disagree a bit on this one, but let's chat it out. Let's discuss what's going on in the world of Bitcoin and privacy. So, probably obviously, the main topic here is going to be around what's going on with Wasabi Wallet and the blacklisting. But if you wanted to just give us your thoughts on how we got to this situation, like why is, or maybe just provide a bit of an overview about what's going on for listeners who aren't familiar, and then we can discuss the various issues.
Yeah, so the TLDR is that the ZKSnacks coordinator of Wasabi Wallet, the default, has decided to start blacklisting or censoring certain UTXOs that are associated with known criminals to its best of its ability. And why is that a problem in the first place? And I think for that, we have to go back all the way to the very beginning. Of where Coinjoin was actually discussed. 2010, I think the concept came around, and then 2013, Gregory Maxwell formalized it, that you don't need to be a single user making a Bitcoin transaction all by yourself with only inputs that you actually control. Because if you do that all by yourself, a thing like the common input ownership heuristic applies. Right, so whenever you see someone making a payment with multiple inputs, you can assume all of these inputs belong to the same person, even when they're not on the same address, right? And this is some additional information that you share with every Bitcoin transaction that you make, right? And then in 2013, there came this concept of a Coinjoin. Let's just get together a group of users where we all have some inputs and we all have some outputs, and let's just make a transaction together. There's nothing in the Bitcoin consensus protocol that says that's not allowed, right? And the big question is then, so we're as a group now building a new PSPT, right? A new partially or unsigned CoinJoin transactions where people add their inputs and their outputs, right? And the question is, how do we get a consensus on which transaction are we building here, right? Which inputs are included and which outputs, and in which order, right? Because since all inputs need to sign the exact same message, right? The actual transaction referencing all the inputs and outputs. And well, that's a consensus problem, right? And all the way back, we had centralized solutions to this consensus problem, right? Just let's pick one computer that keeps the PSPT, right? And users need to connect to this computer and say, hey, these are the inputs I want to register. These are the outputs I want to register. And centralized things are easy, quote unquote. They're fast, they're scalable, they just work. And then we saw multiple centralized CoinJoin implementations, like for example, Join Market being one of the early pioneers, right? And then Wasabi coming later, where the big difference is that in Wasabi or Samurai, you see a single coordinator that is connected to by all clients by default, right? So you download a package software, and you as a client now connect to the default coordinator, which is just one long-term reputable person. And hopefully, if there are not enough app downloads and people depositing money into their wallets, then hopefully they're going to register, and hopefully you're going to have enough liquidity, right? Because we're here trying to hide in a crowd, so you need a crowd. And hopefully lots of different people that look very different on the input side, right? You want to get a lot of different transaction graphs consolidated in a CoinJoin. And centralized or these coordinators with a steady reputation have done a decent job at that to some extent. But a join market has a brilliant solution to this too, right? So an actual user who wants to make a coin join to a very specific round parameter, like exactly this standard denomination or equal denomination I want to create, right? The user is the coordinator as the taker, and he defines the round parameters. But then how are you going to get liquidity into your coin join, right? You're just this random identity on the internet. Why would anyone connect to you, right? You're not even packaging yourself as the default in some software. Well, the market is the solution. You just pay people to provide liquidity, right? And those liquidity providers are the makers. They're willing to coin join with any round parameter for the amount of sats that they actually have, right? They don't care what the standard denomination is. They just want to coin join. And that is a very genius solution, and it distributes kind of the task of running a coordinator, because there's not just one for the software, but every user has the coordination code included, and every user can spin up a taker very, very easily, right? However, well, that's still, it's still quite complex. And even though it's a great solution, there's room for other solutions, and this is then where centrally coordinated Coinjoin wallets with a steady, long-term, reputable coordinator is there. But, well, there's, whenever you have a trusted third party, here in the sense of a trusted third party with whom you build your PSBT together, right, that's the one single computer that has the authoritative copy of which transaction are we going to sign. And well, trusted third parties are a security hole. And that's why there is a big problem here, right? For one is, how are you going to talk to that coordinator? And then, for example, Join Market uses IRC servers, right? And no actual blinding in the protocol itself. So you as a maker just provide all of your inputs and all of your output addresses in a single message to the taker, right? And then the taker can actually spy on you as a maker, right? Because there is no encryption used. And that's a problem, right? So Gregory Maxwell, already back in 2013, had this one single line, in his description of, hey, how about we just use Chaumian blind signatures, and we basically create a eCash token, a digital bearer certificate, which represents access rights to this PSBT whiteboard. Right? So you can purchase yourself some access credentials in input registration. When you present your input and you prove that you're actually the one who controls the script and can sign for this input. Right? And when you've done that, the coordinator will put your input into the PSBT, and he will give you this digital bearer certificate, a blinded token, right, which is the access right to also write an output to this PSBT board. Right. However, because this is a Chaumian eCache, the anonymity set of any token is all users. Right. So the coordinator cannot differentiate any of these tokens. Right. So when you later come and you present a token and you register your output, the coordinator has no way to link you to the input side, right? He does not know which input is associated to this output. He just knows that there was an input. He has verified that, right? So it's not that someone is registering just an output of 1,000 Bitcoin, even though he doesn't have an input, right? And that's very important, right? So with using advanced blinded cryptography, we can reduce the amount of information that the coordinator has. And that's a very crucial point, because the more information the coordinator has, well, the more you've attributed yourself to these actions, and the more there can be selective censorship going on. Right? So the ultimate goal is to reduce the amount of information that the coordinator learns to as little as is reasonable and possible. Right? But the thing is, you still have to talk to the coordinator, and you will still have to provide some information. Right? Specifically, which input are you registering? And also, which output are you registering? Right? The coordinator might not be able to link the one to the other, but he can still see that a certain input was registered. Right? And well, I don't think that there is any way to get around this problem in Bitcoin. Right? The coordinator and all signers just need to know what are the inputs and the outputs. Right? There needs to be a consensus on this. That's the entire point. And that just that means that there is going to be some level of control and censorship inherently just in the protocol. And specifically, as we're seeing it now, well, the coordinator can just say, hey, this certain input, I'm like pretty sure that this comes from a hacker who stole thousands of Bitcoins from innocent users. And you know what? I just don't want to allow this certain input to be registered. For whatever reasons, we can go into them at a later point, right? But this is just one piece of information that any coordinator will always have. And whenever you must reveal some information, you can be associated to it, and the other person can make decisions based on the information that you have revealed, specifically here, not allowing you to register. And then so the proper solution around this would maybe be something like a decentrally coordinated Coinjoin, right? So we remove that single computer that keeps our authoritative copy of the PSBT that we're building, and we distribute this out so that there's just a network of peers that share information in multiple rounds with everyone, right? And they then get a consensus on which transaction to sign without there being a single third party that they all trust. Right? CoinShuffle or CoinShuffle++ are great decentralized Coinjoin protocols. They're just very complex, inefficient, and slow. And so even though we looked into them, it's just, well, building stuff decentralized is bloody difficult, and doing it centralized is a lot easier. Okay. And I think that's why we will stick with centralized Coinjoins for a while. But any centralized Coinjoin has that problem that you might be excluded from its round.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just summarize some of that for listeners to make sure everyone's following along. So the idea is there are, I guess, today three, I guess, well-known types of or three well-known Coinjoin providers, and I guess we're going to get into exactly what does that mean. But the general idea, as you're saying, is that people who want to participate in the Coinjoin, they're registering their inputs into that Coinjoin. This Coinjoin coordinator is helping with that, and then you are receiving those coins on the output side, as you said, the registering of the outputs part. And of course, there is that architectural difference here with, say, join market, where it's coordinated through IRC channels, and basically it's like the maker and taker. There's a little bit more going on there, that the taker is the one who is paying the Coinjoin fee, and then he gets a little bit more privacy because of that, whereas the maker is the one sitting there just providing his coins for liquidity for the Coinjoin, right? Whereas the Wasabi and Samurai model, there is a coordinator who's actually doing that as a centralized entity. Now, I think to bring that now to what's happening in recent weeks, let's say, with Wasabi Wallet and ZKSnacks, it seems so. Going back a few years, that was never it was never seen like, oh, we're going to have multiple coordinators, right? This seems to have been a recent, I guess, change in the language or change in the strategy. Why is that now? This is becoming now the way, because isn't it that people have to build up a reputation in a particular coordinator, whether that's the Samurai coordinator or the Wasabi, what used to be the one Wasabi Wallet coordinator? Why is it now a change in that reasoning and strategy that there should be multiple?
Yeah, so there has always been a default coordinator, right, in both Samurai and Wasabi. But just to stick with Wasabi for now, like the code for the backend is open source. Everything from the very first commit, both client and backend, free and open source, very well documented of how you can run the backend coordinator by yourself, right? And in fact, for the 1.0 zero-link coordinator, a couple people did that. I know of a handful, maybe 5 mainnet coordinators. That provided the exact same service that ZKSnacks did, right? But with some different configurations in the round parameters, right? Because again, if we have a trusted third party, that central coordinator defines the round parameters, right? What's the minimum and maximum input value? What's the standard or equal denomination that we generate, right? All of these things are just inherently defined, dictated by the coordinator. In the join market model, because the taker is the coordinator and because the taker actually has inputs and outputs, right, you're going to choose a denomination that suits your preferences, right? And that's awesome because you can make a Coinjoin with some random denomination like 10.675 Bitcoin or something, and you're still going to get people to Coinjoin at specifically that value that you want, right? That's awesome. This way you can actually have payments in a Coinjoin just with having one standard denomination. At least one person can make an arbitrary amount payment, the taker, right? But with zero-link, it's different. In the sense that you just have one coordinator that does dictate the exact round parameters, and this coordinator is not even a user of the Coinjoin. He doesn't have inputs, right? So, and for example, in Wasabi's case, the ZKSnacks coordinator had a minimum denomination of 0.1 Bitcoin, and that was like the one default denomination that every user had to be part of. So if you have less than 0.1 Bitcoin, sorry, but you can't Coinjoin, right? And if you have 100 Bitcoin, well, you're only going to get a large anonymity set for the 0.1 Bitcoin denomination, right? So you're going to get or have to get many different UTXOs. Right? If you have 100 Bitcoin, you get like roughly 1,000 coins worth 0.1 Bitcoin, right? So that's a bit tough. And then we saw other coordinators defining different standard or equal denominations, right? So, for example, the Chaincase zero-link coordinator, they had a 0.01 Bitcoin, I think, or 0.05 or something like that. Right? Just because it was on mobile, people don't tend to have that many that much Bitcoin on mobile wallets, and still alpha software, so he wanted to take it slow. But that's a very valuable thing of why you would want to run a different coordinator, because you want to have different round parameters. Right? And of course, mainly on the technical level, these round parameters do include the equal denomination, especially in zero-link. Not so much in Wasabi, but wabisabi, but we'll talk about that a bit later, maybe. But the other main, then one additional configuration that you can do is just, deny certain coins or to register to your round. And again, that's nothing new. That has always existed in Wasabi code. That's the denial of service protection, right? If you have a Coinjoin with a bunch of inputs and outputs, and one of these inputs fails to sign the Coinjoin, then you can assume, because you have denial of service protections, that you can assume that this is actually a malicious user who wants to disrupt the round. So what you do is you start the next round, the blame round, right? But there you exclude, you censor that specific input that did not sign, right? So this blacklisting logic has been in the code since day one, and it has been executed, and people have been blocked in
now
Wasabi already.
sorry, Max, to be clear though, that is for a different reason, right? I think we could agree. So
Absolutely.
there is the reason of having certain protections in the code to allow a Coinjoin round to proceed, despite, let's say, one user who is, let's say, being malicious, or maybe even in a non-malicious case, maybe their internet cut out or something like that. And so the coordinator might logically say, look, fine, we're just going to exclude party A from the Coinjoin because they are disrupting the Coinjoin, whether intentionally or not. That's distinct from, the blacklisting that we're talking about today, right?
For sure, yes. But I'm just highlighting that this idea of having multiple coordinators has existed in the past, right? And there are many reasons why you would want to run your own coordinator. And one of the other main reasons is because you want to control which inputs are actually going to be registered there. Right, you can have invite-only Coinjoins. There are zero-link Wasabi coordinators out there where the actual onion is not public knowledge. Right, so you need to be like, someone needs to invite you by sending you this onion, and only then can you Coinjoin. Right, so here you could have Coinjoins just among your friends who know about this onion address of the coordinator. Right, so to curate who actually gets to register is already a lived like use case of one quite big zero-link coordinator. And sure, it's very different to now also add the additional metadata that we have on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? That chain surveillance companies provide, all these tags of the risk factor of certain coins. Yes, that's definitely something new. So I'm not trying to down talk this here, right? But it's somewhat of a soft fork, right? You're changing the acceptance of which coins do you consider valid, not on the Bitcoin consensus layer, right? That's the other important thing. Like Bitcoin consensus is still permissionless and decentralized enough that you can make payments even if you are blacklisted, right? You can just either get hash rate yourself or bribe a miner to hash a block with your transaction in it, right? So Bitcoin works. But what we're talking here about is, will you get access to someone else's computer? Will someone else allow you to write stuff on his computer? Basically, right? And this is like in my opinion, this is, well, ultimately it comes down to property rights, right? It's a coordinator is just someone else's computer and it's not yours, right? So you ought to be quite thankful that someone actually provides you a service where you can use his computer for certain things, like coordinating around, right? But well, for arbitrary reasons, any entrepreneur can decline to do business with anyone, right? And now, sure, we can talk about the rationale behind the selective curation of your customer base as an entrepreneur, and that there can be strategic blunders here. Absolutely, you might lose a shit ton of customers, but there might also be quite valid reasons for doing this, right? But fundamentally, I think ethically speaking, it's very much in line.
So this is where we are coming to, and I think we were talking on Twitter, maybe I left a comment under one of your posts saying, I think this is an obfuscation a bit, right? Like you're saying that you're sort of retreating back to this idea of, it's the freedom of the entrepreneur. And I think basically most people in Bitcoin already accept this freedom, right? I think I would say that's not the point in contention here. The point in contention here is more about, are you actually doing what you set out to do, right? Because I mean, and look, Max, this is something you've commented, I believe, even in maybe two years ago or 2019 or around there. You were literally saying chain surveillance, or not in these exact words, but you said something like, you are my enemy, right? Like we're trying to end you, or something similar like this. And you tagged in a bunch of these chain surveillance companies. And now it seems like very disjointed or awkward now that you're in a position where ZKSnacks is actually having to work with one or some of these entities. How do you square these two ideas?
Yeah, definitely. For me personally, my views did not change. I'm actually still quite critical of the decision that ZKSnacks made here, and arguably this is quite a blunder, right? So But again, right? I'm not the company. I'm just a random contributor, so I don't get to make the decision, and it's even tough for me to question these decisions, right? But yes, and the reasons why I have so many quarrels with these companies is for one that Bitcoin is a public ledger, so they are just accumulating whatever information that they already have, right? But the thing is that many Bitcoin users have really bad practices when it comes to privacy usage of this public ledger, right? Address reuse, massive input consolidation, rounded payments amounts, all these things, right? And basically, chain surveillance companies now prey on the mistakes of individuals, right? And that's just for me a weird thing. I mean, I have nothing inherently against private investigators, but it just seems to me as being a really odd business model, and I still don't support it. However, it it is just a reality. There is outside consensus metadata of the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And certain coins are attributed to certain users, right? Now, in some cases, some very few cases, we have a very clear definition, or a very clear, it's very obvious that a certain coin belongs to a criminal. For example, the Bitfinex hacker, right? That was massive consolidation of all the money that he stole, and I mean, it's not that easy to hide 10,000s of Bitcoin, So in that case, for example, it was pretty obvious. Hey, this is someone who just literally stole Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is not unconfiscatable. You can't steal Bitcoin very much. You can take Bitcoin that is not yours, specifically in such a custodial clusterfuck as that was, right? And then that's the question of, so what do we do when we actually have cases that are very clear cut, right? But then the more pressing matter is, well, it's not always going to be clear cut, right? Especially when you start making transactions, especially when you have things like coin swaps, Lightning, pay joins. We're working really hard to make the life of chain surveillance miserable, and that means that they're going to have many more false positives. So they're going to say that this coin is owned by a criminal, even though it's actually a peaceful individual, right? And they're going to have false negatives. There's going to be a bunch of criminals who are going to use Bitcoin in a private preserving way that it's going to be very difficult to attribute their actions to the coins that they have, right? So this is where I have a big quarrel with, right? The false positives and the false negatives. And I would say that, at least as I understand it, ZKSnacks will try to only focus on these cases that are really clear cut, very obvious, very little ambiguity. Because only then it works, right? Because if you have too many false positives and false negatives, it doesn't make sense, right? You're just disrupting your business way too much. But in a really clear-cut, obvious case, I get it.
So I'm not sure how much you're able to share or how much you know, but are you able to share which chain surveillance tool is being used here? Do you know the method by which these obvious or clear-cut determinations will be made, or is it like a black box that users are meant to just submit to the black box without knowing if their coins will be censored out of or stopped from participating in a Coinjoin round?
Yeah, I actually don't know yet which company is being chosen. But as far as I understand it, so there's a risk score between 1 to 10, 1 being least risk, 10 being the highest. And the idea is to only take out risk factor 10, right? So only the highest that could be argued is the one with least ambiguity. But again, not sure on this. This might change, right? But and then the question of, is it a black box? I guess it is, because this is a configuration on the backend server. You just don't know what the configuration is, right? And I don't know if the choice of which coins, which coin categories are blacklisted, for example, saying chain analysis risk factor 10 or something like that, if that would be revealed in the coordinator get status API request. I don't know. Arguably, it could be. Right, but one really, really interesting difference is if a custodial exchange does these chain surveillance, right? They only get the information of which coin paid them after the transaction was broadcast, right? And it's out, and the Bitcoin is sent. And then the custodian is in possession of the Bitcoin, right? And then they are saying, okay, no, actually, we don't like the transaction history, so we're going to refuse this. But then you have this issue of a refund process, right? Now you actually need to refund the money to the person who sent it to you, and that's very complicated and usually another privacy leak. Right? But with Coinjoins, it's very different. A Coinjoin is fundamentally secure in the sense that no money moves until you verified both inputs and outputs of the final transaction, and you sign it, and everyone else signs it. Right? So, and I think technically how this is going to work, that during input registration or at the end of input registration, an API request is made to the chain surveillance firm, and then you see which inputs are not allowed or blacklisted, basically. And these then get like a response from the coordinator with, sorry, we could not allow your coin to be registered because of these reasons. Right? But the cool thing is, your money never moved. This was all during the coordination of the PSPT. Right? Nothing was signed, and your input isn't even revealed to other participants of the round. Right? So this is there's never going to be an issue that you're going to send money somewhere in the Coinjoin and then all of a sudden it has to be reverted because of the censorship. No, this is this happens before even you move your coins, like before there's any chance of signing the transaction. So there is an interesting nuance here with Coinjoin that custodial providers have different.
So I understand that point, that you're saying in the case of using a custodial exchange, you might be then in the position of asking for your coins back. But
Exactly.
In this case, with the Wasabi, you would have, as an example, you might have some coins outside in a different wallet, and you spend them into Wasabi Wallet, and then basically what you're saying is Wasabi Wallet would then poll or API call to the chain surveillance company and say, hey, is this coin from Stephan? Is it a risk factor 10 coin? Yes. Okay, then Stephan's coin cannot participate in the Coinjoin with ZKSnacks as the coordinator. That's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just, of course, we don't know that you're Stephan. We just see a random Tor identity popping up. Correct. And registering a single coin. Another interesting thing is if you have, let's say, 5 coins that you want to register, one of them is risk factor 10, right, but the other 4 are not. The cool thing, what we fixed with wabisabi, is that there is no longer input consolidation in the coordination protocol, right? So whereas in ZeroLink, you had to provide one API request with one Tor identity where you list all of the inputs that you want to consolidate in this round. With wabisabi, that's gone, right? So you create a new Tor identity and just push one input through that, right, to the coordinator. And then another new independent Tor identity, and that connects to the coordinator, right? So ultimately, the coordinator no longer knows which inputs belong to one user in this round. So in our case here, one blacklisted coin and 4 none, your one blacklisted coin would get the response, hey, sorry, you can't Coinjoin with this. But the 4 other ones would still go through because the coordinator has no way of knowing that they actually do belong to you or to the same person that has the blacklisted coin.
Yeah, and the weird thing to me, though, is if the idea is these are privacy tools, isn't there like a little bit of a contradiction here? Because in some ways, one of the arguments is, and this is even on the Wasabi Wallet FAQ, is that some of these chain surveillance firms oversell their capability, right? They overstate their capacity to actually trace coins. And so isn't it sort of a contradictory thing where you're kind of speaking out of both sides of your mouth here? Because it's kind of like we're saying, oh, look, use this privacy wallet, and we don't like the chain surveillance companies because they are overstating their capabilities. But at the same time, you're like, at least ZKSnacks, not Wasabi Wallet, ZKSnacks is paying or presumably working with them to get their opinion on whether this coin is high risk factor or not. Don't you see a contradiction there?
Absolutely. No, for sure. One of my main points that I quarrel with as well, right? There are false positives, there are false negatives. These are all based on heuristics, right? And yes, they are oversold tremendously, right? So, yeah, that's a contention, right? But still, there are some cases where it's really clear cut, right? The Bitfinex hacker was one of them, right? And if you try to only take out these cases, it's not perfect. I absolutely agree, but there's a lot of nuance in how you could implement this. And my personal opinion on the final judgment of what ZKSnacks is doing here very much is still out in the open because it just depends on the nuances. If all of a sudden all Canadian truckers, all peaceful Russian civilians start getting blocklisted, I would have big quarrels with that. Right? But if, on the other hand, only politicians and other violent criminals are getting blacklisted, well, then I'm happy. So I guess it really depends. There's a lot of nuance here. But in general, what we can say, yes, just that is another precedence that UTXOs are not fungible, that there is metadata associated to UTXOs that are outside of the consensus implementation. Right? And that's just super difficult, because now you're going to have different surveillance companies that have different blacklists and different risk scores associated to it. Right? And now you have competing soft fork clients, basically, that reach a different consensus of which coins are good and which coins are bad. Right? And well, there's no solution to it. Right? Bitcoin is the only solution to reach a decentralized consensus on something like this. And well, obviously, Bitcoin doesn't work if you would have KYC and all these things baked in. So I agree. There's a lot of uncertainty here, a lot of edge cases where it's definitely not going to work, right? But this is why we need a free market, right? This is why we will have even more wabi-sabi coordinators, I think, that just try out the different things, right? And one of the other big things that we didn't mention yet, but should be obvious, not just do entrepreneurs have the choice of which customers to work with, obviously customers have the choice of which entrepreneur to work with. Right? So you don't have to talk to the ZKSnacks coordinator if you don't agree with this censoring just for any reason, on ethical grounds, or not even if you're affected from it. You might not even be blacklisted yourself, but you still might disagree with the choice that the coordinator did. And then sure, use another coordinator that makes sense, and that's a good thing. Right? So in a free market, all these conflicts over what service should be provided and how should customer and entrepreneur collaborate together, like, that doesn't work in a centrally planned system, right? It only works in a free market, because there we have optionality and choice. And so I think there is a large user base who would insist to not Coinjoin their coins with known public criminals, with the risk score 10, for example. That was one of the feedbacks that I got, especially from companies and institutional people of, hey, how about you Coinjoin? Well, first thing was, it's too expensive. It just consumes too much block space, right? We kind of fixed that with 2.0. It's way much block space efficient. And then the second thing was, I don't want to Coinjoin my money with criminals. Like, I personally don't agree with that statement, but it was one of the major feedbacks that we got. Right? And now, if you would have on the coordinator side a blacklisting, a curation of these known criminals, then a lot of users are going to be happy. Right? A lot of users are not going to be happy because they care about freedom of speech and permissionless interactions. But some users just want to be perceived as not dirty, right? And it's just a reality that this concept of taint and metadata, as flawed as it is, it's just a reality of how it works today. Right? And we saw, for example, a lot of Coinjoin outputs being blacklisted with custodians precisely because there was some high risk score associated with them. Right now, if you would remove all of the high risk score inputs, right, then like blacklisting the outputs doesn't really make sense, right? Because there was no high risk input, so there cannot be a high risk output. Kind of, at least to some extent. So arguably, that might improve the blacklisting of Coinjoin of all Coinjoin outputs, with some entrepreneurs who just don't want to work with that risk of the ambiguity of a Coinjoin. Now, I get that that's not the most strong of all arguments, and I think the jury is still out. I don't know if Coinjoin, like the acceptance of Coinjoin outputs, will increase for the ZKSnacks coordinator compared to others who don't have this. I guess we'll see how the market reacts.
Because at least maybe, okay, the way I'm seeing it, I think very few people would want to use this, because I think it just goes very anathema. It's very anti the whole idea of having a privacy wallet that censors people. And obviously, with the DOS reason aside, right, censoring people based on the past history of that coin, it just seems completely antithetical in my view. So I'm just very confused. And I think probably the other question that a lot of people have is, why is ZKSnacks trying to pre-comply or comply before there's even a regulation or even some kind of police instruction or law enforcement instruction of, hey, you must stop these bad coins? Why is that happening before why is ZKSnacks jumping the gate, basically?
Another of my main,
or jumping the gun rather, but go on.
Yeah, another of my main quarrels with this, right? Just to be clear, there is no regulation that would comply this or compel this, and I don't think that there would be anytime soon, because it's freedom of speech, man. The coordinator is just a message relay. It's a chat room. You pass messages from left to right. If that's illegal, like, everything breaks down. Civilization is at an end at that point. So I hope that it will never reach that point that some outside party will compel ZKSnacks to blacklist certain UTXOs. Right? And by the way, just because ZKSnacks is now blacklisting some coins doesn't mean that regulators will be happy, right? Because some will say blacklist all Russian civilians, or all truckers. But as far as I get it, ZKSnacks would not do that, right? And there might still be friction here, right? So again, this is a soft fork, right? Other people might not agree with the consensus rules that you have, right? There's a lot of nuance here, and so yeah, it's a tough one, really. But and I kind of would have preferred if this were a client side policy, right? If on the client side you could blacklist certain risk factors, for example, because there are people who would be super stringent, right? I want to go all the way down to only coin joining with risk factor 1, lowest risk possible, for example. And some clients would have this specific preference, and maybe it could be implemented in a nice way on the client side, so that if you don't care, you just leave it all the way up to 10, and if you do care, you configure it, right? And maybe that would have led to a better outcome, because you can still talk to one coordinator, and all the risk factor coins can still talk to one coordinator, and then we just figure out on the client side of how to allocate this. Maybe I really kind of hope to see a future where a lot of the Coinjoin coordination goes a lot to client side, and the optionality of a coordinator becomes less and less. I think we're getting there. We're not yet there fully, but and one of the major downsides is that then every client would have to have an account with the chain surveillance company, right? If you want to curate the coins that you're seeing in this proposed Coinjoin, and you decide whether or not you want to Coinjoin based on the metadata risk factor, right? You need to ask the chain surveillance company, and then you need to get an account and KYC probably and all of this. So that not that easy. So in the meantime, just doing it top down from the coordinator side is a solution that. So assuming that you want to do this, it is a solution that is cheaper, right? Because only one person has to talk to the chain surveillance company compared to all the users who want to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's just probably the other point that's very antithetical, is this supposed privacy company is now paying a surveillance, like presumably there's a payment relationship going in here where ZKSnacks is paying the chain surveillance firm for access to their surveillance black box to figure out which ones are risk factor 10. And it just seems so antithetical to me. Like, why would you want to participate in that? Why would users want to be a part of this system?
Yeah, good question. And I agree, right? I would prefer if ZKSnacks would have hired another developer compared to paying the surveillance company, right? Obviously. However, I mean, for one, it's their money. Who am I to disagree where they spend it with? If hookers and coke do it, but on the other hand, a lot of the vast majority of the revenue still gets reinvested in free and open source software. Like it's crazy how many people get paid for working on Wasabi and other projects by now, right? So yes, some money goes to the enemy. The majority still stays within the ecosystem. So I think. Yes, a lot of users will disagree with the move and go to a different coordinator entirely, right? But I'm not sure if everyone will do that,
Yeah. Okay. And the other point that perhaps I'm speculating a little bit, but when I saw this news, I got a bit skeptical and thought, is this a regulatory capture play, right? So as we see with the likes of the chain surveillance firms, they are trying to go out there, market themselves to governments and market themselves to exchange compliance teams, saying, you need us to help, because they'll market it like, look, see, we're keeping the crypto streets clean. When I think people who know better understand that a lot of the heuristics and this kind of tainting idea is oversold, as we've agreed. So is there an angle there that ZKSnacks is almost trying to get into the regulatory capture game to sort of say, look, see, we're a regulatory compliant Coinjoin, so therefore, Mr. Government or Mr. Regulator, Mr. Central Bank, please do not shut me down, or exchanges, please do not blacklist the coins coming out from me, ZKSnacks coordinator,
Yeah, that's certainly a desired outcome. right? And again, I don't think that governments have the power to actually shut down the coordinator and mandate a certain blacklisting. And I still think ZKSnacks is going to make legal stance on that, because they want to actually choose what to blacklist. They don't want to be dictated what to blacklist, right? So I don't think that this free speech argument is over. But I think it's to some extent at least delayed. I think that this move extended the life cycle of ZKSnacks as a company, just because there are obvious regulatory risks involved with this, and anti-money launderings are crazy. Like the laws, they're really insane, right? So it's there's going to be some aspects of it that might still lead to contention in the future, right? But one other thing is that if you, as a Coinjoin coordinator, if you want to work with institutional clients and really, hedge funds, insurance funds, Michael Saylor and all these people, well, even if ZKSnacks were not to be regulated, those customers might very well be, right? Maybe because they're custodians of other people's money or whatnot, right? And then these regulated entities can only become users of a coordinator, arguably, not sure, but if such a blacklisting is involved. Again, the major feedback that I got from institutionals regarding Coinjoin adoption was, I don't want to mix with criminals. My compliance team is going to take me apart on that one. Now, I don't know if there is an actual concern here, right? Or if this is just, again, some preemptive, speculative compliance. But arguably there is, right? So we might see this world where ZKSnacks specifically, has a bunch of liquidity from institutionals that are just not comfortable to Coinjoin with another coordinator, which has the anyone can join policy, including criminals, right? So there's really a lot of nuance here. So yes, this alienates a lot of users, me being one of them, but also this will encourage a lot of new users to come in. And that is why it was kind of a preemptive step from ZKSnacks, because the question was, we're already really big, but we want to get even bigger, and how do we not just attract more liquidity, but how do we also ensure that our legal setup will survive in the long run, and we're just not completely overwhelmed with court cases and things like this. And this was just one preemptive move to help with the scaling of the company. Right? Because we think that now we can provide the service at a much larger scale while still having way less regulatory pressure than before. Because again, the coordinator can blacklist inputs, right? And he can at least pay someone else to find out what the risk factor of this input is. Right? So if you now do take the preemptive step to exclude known criminals, that might be or desired by certain customers. But again, like I really struggle to say something here with certainty, because preferences are subjective and value is subjective, and customers will have their own preferences that I just don't know and could never predict. Right? So I'm going to be very, very, very curious of the actual on-chain activity that ZKSnacks has and that other Wasabi 2.0 coordinators will have. There's still, defaults matter a lot. That's the other thing. Right? And if you download the Wasabi package and you just by default connect to that one coordinator, obviously he still will get a large liquidity, but it's going to be very curious to see how other non-blacklisting coordinators do in any case.
So a couple of reactions, but first I want to talk a little bit about the free and voluntary interaction part, right? Because as we've been talking about a lot, we've been talking about the free choice of entrepreneurs, of consumers, but there is a serious risk then of regulatory capture if, say, if the regulation gets crafted in such a way to say, look, see, this company is doing it. Why doesn't every other company do it? And if you're not doing it, that's the new regulatory standard. And then what happens is one big company gets the regulation almost becomes a cocoon or a defensive moat around them that then does actually influence other people's choices in a way that's not voluntary, right? Because we've been talking about voluntary, right? But when it's a government regulation, that's not voluntary. So there's a lot of people who might then get impacted by that regulatory capture angle of it, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's a big risk. And that's why this is a bad precedence. This is the first Coinjoin coordinator to actually do that. that might lead to it being misinterpreted. That this is required to comply with anti-money laundering regulations. But again, ZKSnacks isn't really making that argument, right? They're just saying we are still the only one who can make this decision of whom to work with or not. We're not going to tolerate anyone dictating us certain users that we cannot work with, unless there are sufficient reasons that we agree with, right? So this free speech argument is it's not yet over, and we'll see how ZKSnacks will handle this and pioneer this in the future. But again, there will be other coordinators, and they will be legal entities too, some of them at least, and some of them will very much pursue a legal battle to make a clear precedence that this is not at all required. Right, so I really hope that someone spins up a new coordinator, has a staunch free speech and anti-censorship ethos, then earns a bunch of money and uses that to defend himself in legal courts and set legal precedents. That would be great. I would love to see that, right? And to a certain extent, ZKSnacks is going to do exactly that too. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess there's a couple other things that people. I mean, there's always debates back and forth about what's going on with Wasabi, but one of them that I continually see is things around address reuse, and it seems like there's this constant debate back and forth there that that's an old bug, but then it's still occurring, and then we're hearing different stories of people speculate that okay, is it that there are different users running the same seed on different Wasabi clients, and therefore that's why we're seeing this address reuse. From your perspective, Max, why are we seeing address reuse still in Wasabi Wallet Coinjoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were numerous bugs and edge cases, and some of them were triggered by running multiple clients in parallel, right? Which is just not a supported way to use the software. It just won't work. But also, we didn't have a way to actually discourage users to do that, right? There wasn't a big notification if you don't. There's just an open PR that implements this, right? So that when one client sees coins of its wallet registered that he not register himself, then he will shut down and not Coinjoin anymore, right? So that will solve some of this further. There were some bugs in Bitcoin Knots on our backend that destroyed the mempool when it wasn't a bug in Bitcoin Knots, just weird behavior that we didn't anticipate, where it lost the mempool after a restart, right? And that led to some Coinjoin coins being no longer recognized in the client, unconfirmed, right? And then these addresses weren't marked as spent, and then they were reused in the future, right? Things like this. Probably forgetting a couple. There was something in our block filters too, I think. But yeah, the thing is, complex is bloody. Software is bloody difficult, and the problem is, mistakes on mainnet are memorable, and when you run buggy software on mainnet and there are certain bugs, they will just get fixed afterwards, but the mistakes that you made are still there. So I think a lot of the things that we saw were either even already fixed at the time where the mistake was made, but the user was running an out-of-date client, right? Or later it got fixed. And yeah, so there is, however, the big question of should the coordinator be actively blacklisting certain addresses that are reused or coins that come from a reused address. That's a tough one because address reuse is a quote unquote legitimate use of Bitcoin, right? You can have a public donation address, right? And then, for example, you have multiple coins on the same address, and now you want to register them in a Coinjoin, and that's going to be a coin from a previous address that's going to be registered again, right? Or if you want to make payments inside a Coinjoin, you might want to pay someone who actually has an address reused, right? So there might be multiple Coinjoins that have outputs of this one receiver who has a static address. Right? Things like this are all possible, and therefore blacklisting it on the coordinator side is difficult. Now there are some cases where you can do that, and I think there's something in the code there now. So it's it's a tough one. I personally like to think that the coordinator really is quite stupid. He's just a PSBT whiteboard, and ultimately it's up to the user of which coins to register and which addresses to register. of course, I would hope to say that the bugs are fixed now. We actually saw on testnet some address reuse too. And then we found that we actually had a bug in the new code, 2.0 related. So that is fixed now. And I think now for the last couple of weeks, there hasn't been any address reuse on testnet. So I'm thinking, I'm hoping that it's good now. But yeah, there's just a lot of edge cases that you need to consider, and it's not easy, right? So, but hopefully we'll have bug-free software now, at least in that extent.
Right. I mean, as I understand, I mean, I still see it's like there's regular, like even an hour or two ago, I saw there's like an address reuse happening in some Wasabi Coinjoin.
On mainnet?
So uh, it just, I think, and maybe part of this is like an architectural difference as well. So as I see in like say the Samurai where they do like a TX0 and they split it out earlier, then it may be that that's an easier way to stop address reuse. So I'm curious as well from your perspective, and I don't know whether you are speaking for ZKSnacks or just for yourself. What is the reason for that architectural difference? Is it an efficiency thing? Is it some other reason?
Yeah, absolutely. Block space efficiency, saving users on mining fee cost. That was always a design constraint in Wasabi. And zero link is flawed in many ways, in big air quotes. For example, the input to input linkage, right? And the input to change output linkage. The coordinator knows, at least. And there's only one denomination or multiples thereof, kind of. So you could have a zero link implementation like Samurai that implements the on-chain graph in a way that adheres to the limitations of the coordination principle, right? So every user only has one input, and every user only gets one equal amount output and no change, right? This way, the coordinator cannot link anything here, right? And that's great. It's just horrendously block space expensive, because for one, you need to have two transactions, your TX0, and then a second transaction, right? And so you have multiple coins being created and spent, which is a large cost, right? And you have the transaction header overhead, right? So transaction batching is a massive fee savings. Like we're talking, I don't know, kind of depends, but 70, 80% or something like this, just if you batch the TX0 transaction with the actual Coinjoin, right? And then when you have, you could also then have multiple denominations in separate transaction pools, right? Like Samurai does, the one with 0.1, 0.5, 1 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, whatever, right? But here again, it's more transactions, more UTXOs being created and destroyed, therefore just a whole bunch more fees. Another thing that we specifically designed Wasabi 2.0 for is that you so we're still batching the different denomination pools, so to say, but in a way that if you have 5 Bitcoin, you're still going to give privacy to the plebs, the plebs who have little Bitcoin, like let's say only 0.1 or something like that. The whale is still going to participate in the lower denomination Coinjoin outputs, and therefore the anonymity set for those lower denominations is going to increase. Right? If you would have only a round of plebs, you would have less anonymity set in that round than if you add the whales into this, and the whales also get some pleb size outputs. And so, and then we had kind of a implementation of zero link that did have compromises in the extent that we accepted certain things that the coordinator will learn, like multiple inputs being able to register at the same time from one user, and that in some cases also results on the blockchain transaction graph, those privacy drawbacks, but they just come at a massive fee savings that is really, really, really substantial. The demurrage cost of using money privately should be low, right? We want to have cheap transaction fees for private payments. And, creating a bunch of UTXOs is just inherently super, super expensive, right? And but what we did with the 2.0 research is we fundamentally improved our coordination protocol, right? We've fixed all the flaws of the zero link coordination protocol. You can now consolidate multiple inputs in a round anonymously. You can now create multiple outputs in a round anonymously, right? Of whatever arbitrary amount you want. right? If you want to create an exactly 0.123456789 output, you can do that, right? And it will be on the coordination level as private as any other amount, right? So because we've now removed the amount of information or reduced the amount of information that the client needs to share with the coordinator, we can go even more into block space savings. And I don't know the exact number, but something like Wasabi 2.0, maybe 100 times cheaper than Wasabi 1.0 for some use cases. And that's mainly
because in terms of miner fee, not in terms of Coinjoin fee, right?
Yes, exactly. We're talking. The main cost is by far mining fee. Coordination fee is trivial and already now in a low fee environment. Even if you have 1 sat per vbyte coin joins, if you're creating hundreds and hundreds of coins, you're going to notice that it's going to eat into your budget, right? So we'll for sure have to optimize for this in the future when fees are sustainably high. But even right now, it is very much noticeable. And again, one of the main feedbacks that I got from especially corporates is, hey, I have a low margin business. I just can't afford to spend 0.1, 0.2% or something on mining fee. That's crazy. I have a margin of 2%. Like, I'm not going to give you like half of my revenue, Yeah. And one other major thing that we've, if you're only allowed to register one input, right, then you cannot make payments. So let's say you register one input worth 1 Bitcoin and you get a 1 Bitcoin private back. And now you make a payment of 0.3 Bitcoin. Right? So now you have the 0.7. How are you going to get back into the 0.1 Bitcoin round? Right? You can't, because you cannot consolidate your 0.7 with another coin that you have to get above the 0.1 again. Right? So then that means that you cannot Coinjoin, make a payment, and then Coinjoin again. Right? That doesn't work. It even doesn't really nicely work in Wasabi 1.0. But there it works better than in Samurai, right? Because at least you can consolidate batched in the Coinjoin itself. Right? And there's some outside ambiguity, but with Wabi-Sabi and Wasabi 2.0, it's fundamentally fixed, right? Because you can register as low as 5,000 sats on the input side, right? And you can consolidate arbitrary coins, a number of coins, I think up to 10, and the coordinator won't know that one person is doing this, right? So that just means you can coin join, and then you make a payment, and with the change output that you receive, you just coin join again, and you can register just the one change output and not consolidate it with any of the other inputs that you control in your UTXO set, right? So there's no consolidation penalty in the remix that you make, because you don't need to consolidate, because any amount is good, right? So this just means with 2.0, you're going to be able to just coin join all the time, basically, make a single user payment, right? At first, we don't even have payments inside CoinJoin, but it's coming. So at first, you just make a single user payment outside of the CoinJoin, and then you can CoinJoin the change. With the fun thing added that for the change and the payment output of the single user payment, if all the inputs of the single user payment are CoinJoin outputs of that coordinator, right, you can remix for free without paying coordination fee. Right? Of course, you do still have to pay mining fee. That's another thing that's difficult with the TX0 setup. Right? You don't know the fee rate in advance, but you're creating in advance the coins that you register into the final CoinJoin round. Right? And there are only 2 fresh coins and like 3 remixes, something like that, maybe flipped around. But that just means that you have a fixed fee that you will pay all the time, right? And you cannot adjust it. And that kind of sucks too, right? So you're gonna overpay or underpay for fees, which is not optimal, right? You're gonna again save on fees and block space, or not on block space, but on fees, if you are able to adjust the fee rate at the point where you're actually creating the CoinJoin itself. And so these are just some of the, I think, many nuances of why I'm not a big fan of the TX0 setup. I don't think it makes sense. Yes, it generates perfect CoinJoins per se, but it comes at a usability downside, at a fee estimation downside, and especially at a block space downside. Right? And all these, I think, are very much reason enough to look for alternatives. Right? And yes, our Wasabi 1.0 implementation wasn't perfect. Right? We could have done it a lot better, even in the zero-link coordination concept of Chaumian blind signatures. But, well, we decided instead to fix the actual CoinJoin coordination model, and make that so that it works with arbitrary amounts, that there's no input or output linkage. Well, we did that, right? But now comes actually the crazy part of, given that we now have the ability to create arbitrary amount coin joins with private consolidations, etc., well, which output amounts do we actually now choose? Because the coordinator now no longer says everyone needs to get the 0.1 Bitcoin output. Right? The coordinator says everything between 5,000 sats and I think 1,300 Bitcoin is good. Right? There are, however, some denominations that are preferred, right? And we curated them based on some research and simulation, and these are basically low Hamming weight numbers, right? So powers of 2, powers of 3, powers of 10, in a 1 to 5 series. And the cool thing is that with these low Hamming weight denominations, you can very efficiently decompose any arbitrary amount, input amount, into a couple, only a handful of outputs. Right, so you have your 1 Bitcoin input, a single 1 Bitcoin input, and you get 3 or 4 coins back, right? And they all have these standard denominations, right? And but because of how we kind of arrange this client side, almost every denomination has at least a couple anonymity sets, right? So equal outputs with exactly the same denomination as these others. We did some simulations. I think if we have 50 inputs, we have 9 change outputs, meaning that they are not equal. They don't have another equal amount. And the average anonymity set size was something like 3.5, I think. But then if we increase that, it gets a whole bunch better. So if I remember correctly, 100 inputs was something like only 3 change outputs with an average anonymity set size of 5, or a median anonymity set size. And then if we're above 350 inputs, we get only 1 change output, like 1 standard denomination, 1 non-equal amount. And that is usually the coordinator fee. Right? So basically every user only gets coins that has at least more than 2 anonymity set, but on the median they have 9 anonymity set. Right? So when we have a lot of inputs being registered, with our client-side amount decomposition that is now possible thanks to Wabi-Sabi, we get a whole bunch more efficient. Right? Like, we don't purchase block space for change anymore. Change can be linked to your inputs. Why would you ever buy block space when it can still be linked to your input, right? It doesn't make sense. So we just don't buy block space anymore when it's not private. And so basically every output that you're going to get, every block space that you purchase will increase your ambiguity, right? And in basically no case will it stay the same. Right? And that's just more and more block space savings.
So just so I can understand that, then what we're talking about here is a Coinjoin that has a massive number of inputs, as an example. So we're talking about basically a huge transaction, right? It's got literally 200 or 300 inputs. And then on the output side there, what does that look like for the end user? At the end, is it one cycle and then they get their output UTXO at the end of it? Or can you explain that part for me?
So there is still going to be a slight fan out on average. So if you have something like 300 inputs, you're going to get 340 outputs. Right? So larger number of outputs than inputs. That's not always the case, but it is the case on average, at least in our simulations. Right? And that means that our UTXO set does slowly grow. Right? We create more outputs than inputs. We could tweak it to actually create less outputs than inputs, but then you would have non-standard denomination change, right? With no anonymity set, right? And well, we figured that it's efficient enough to go all the way that you only create private block space, right? And not no change. And then the question of how much anonymity set would you fancy, would you like? I think that depends a lot on the user, right? What are your preferences? And they're subjective, right? And it's difficult how we're going to get that feedback, right? Because how are you going to ask someone to give their preferences, right? It's not easy. The way that we figured is basically 3 different modes, right? Optimize for speed, optimize for privacy, and optimize for cost, right? And currently you choose one out of these 3. And there are other ways that you could get more fine-grained nuance out of this. That's where the Austrian method comes in with subjective marginal preference scales, right? You could have 3 attributes: speed, privacy, and cost. And now you ask the user, please rank order these 3 attributes to how you want your wallet to behave. So that might be, my highest priority is privacy. My second priority is speed. And my lowest priority is cost, right? So I want to have privacy first and foremost. I want to have it rather quickly, but I really don't care how much money I spend, right? So that another example would be, my highest priority is cost, my second is speed, and my third is privacy, right? So first of all, I don't want to pay much for block space. Right? Second of all, I still want to get it somewhat fast, but really I don't care about the privacy. Like a little ambiguity is good enough, right? I'm not on the FBI most wanted list, so a little bit of anonymity is all right. And the results of this question of user preferences will adjust the behavior of your block space accountant, the robot with whom you charge to purchase block space on your behalf, right? Because and that can be in numerous things, right? So one would be, for example, how many UTXOs do you want to create, right? If you prioritize cost above everything else, you would want to reduce the number of coins that you create, right? Because mining fee is the most substantial. And then if you want to, but for example, if you want to, another thing to control for cost is the current fee rate of the Coinjoin, right? So in the join market maker-taker model, the coordinator, one of the users, just defines the fee rate and pays it. But in the reputable, persistent, centrally coordinated model, the coordinator chooses the fee rate, right? And so at some points in time, the current fee rate is going to be way higher than it was in the past. Mempool spike, right? And you can basically filter out those mempool spikes by saying if the current Coinjoin fee is larger or higher than the median of the last week of all Coinjoins that happened, right? Then I don't want to register, right? So this, you basically only register like whenever it's lower than the average of the last week.
Right. So it's kind of timing, sort of waiting for a good window to opportunistically say, oh, hey, the mempool is low. Let me put mine in now. Kind of.
Exactly.
Kind of that in a sort of a coded way.
Exactly. Yep. And then how do we control for privacy? Well, that's mainly the anonymity set calculation, right? And here we calculate a very conservative lower bound estimate, right? So we only count a number of equal amount outputs, right? And that is your anonymity set. And then there are very strong consolidation penalties, right? So even though the coordinator does not know which coins you consolidate, an outside observer maybe still might get some information. So when you consolidate multiple coins, we just take the lowest common denominator, right? So you have a 10 anon set, a 5 anon set, and a 3 anon set coin, and you all consolidate them. Then the resulting, the combined lowest common denominator would be 3 anon set, right? And let's say on the output side, you get another 5 anon set, right? So you have 3 anon set on the input side because of the consolidation penalty, 5 anon set on the output side, so that's 8, right? I think that's how it works. But so then the question is how much anon set do you actually want? Right? And here, for example, if privacy is your lowest, you're okay with maybe, 5 anon set, and you're going to get 5 anon set basically in a single round. Maybe not for every denomination, but for most, for sure. But if privacy is your highest preference, you might actually want to go all the way to 100 anon set, for example. And now we also have this concept of the minimum and maximum anonymity set range, right? Whereas previously it was a target, and now it is a range, right? So that means if you're below the minimum, you will always register these or you will prefer to register those coins below the anonymity set size, right? Or target minimum. And if you reach over that minimum, but you're still below the maximum, you will only occasionally Coinjoin. Right? You will prefer to Coinjoin the ones who are lower, but you will still do occasional remixes whenever it is opportune. But then if you reach the maximum anonymity set, you will just not Coinjoin anymore, right? That's kind of the sanity check of, hey, if it's more than 100, that's plenty. Please don't waste any more money on buying block space. 100 is sufficient. And that's kind of the controlling mechanisms here.
One other question I've got with Wasabi 2.0, as obviously I haven't used it, is there going to be a segregation there between pre-mix and post-mix, right? Is that segregation going to exist? And are there going to be something like a post-mix spend tools, right? So in Samurai, for example, they have Stonewall X2. These are some examples. So is there going to be some kind of analog or something like that in Wasabi 2.0, or is it a different model?
So yes, there's still the concept of coins that have a known or that are known by a certain identity. So basically your label, right? Generate a new receive address saying, hey, I'm sending that money to Stephan, right? So that address to Stephan, he's going to pay me. And maybe he uses the Kraken exchange and he just makes deposits out of that directly. So I would write Stephan, Kraken, for example, and then then Wasabi will prefer to. This will automatically have a 1 anonymity set, right? And therefore Wasabi will prefer to Coinjoin it, right? Then as soon if it is below the minimum anonymity set score, we keep the labels, right? So that metadata is still there, right? You only got 3 anon set, but your minimum was 5, for example. So it would still show you Stephan and Kraken know that this is yours, right? Wasabi prefers, or as soon as you get above the minimum anon set threshold, that label metadata disappears, though, right? We consider this coin sufficiently private where Stephan and Kraken no longer know that it is actually mine, right? And then whenever you make a single user payment, right, which as of now is when you make a single user payment, Wasabi will always prefer in its automatic coin selection to send those coins that are above the minimum anon set target, even above the maximum anon set target, right? And so in most cases, right, since all of your coins that you get some anonymity set, right? In most cases, you're going to have 70-80% of your wallet balance in above anon set target coins. And therefore, you just select automatically some of them. You don't care which ones are selected because all of them are fungible, quote unquote. All of them have some ambiguity. And then another cool benefit is that because we have these low Hamming weight standard denominations, they don't just effectively get decomposed from one input to multiple outputs. They also get very efficiently consolidated. Right, so let's say you want to make a payment of 1.2 Bitcoin or something like this. Because you have a lot of these standard denominations, you might just have to consolidate a handful of coins to actually get that, and you're going to get exactly the amount that you want to have. Right, so there's not going to be a change coming back to you. We're actually automating that process now that whenever you type in a payment amount, Wasabi will calculate for you in the background and say, hey, here a change output is created if you set exactly that fee rate and that payment amount. But if you send a little bit more or a little bit less, and often it's just a matter of a couple sats, there's not going to be a change amount created. Right.
So it's the kind of stopping the change avoidance. Yeah, change avoidance. I've heard it referred to. So that's an interesting idea. So I think some of it comes down to, for the user, thinking about what am I going to use. It comes down to, in their mind, what quality of Coinjoin are they looking for, and they have to then decide what tools are available in that ecosystem, right? If they're using Join Market or Samurai or Wasabi, they have to think about that. So I think it also it comes down to, I think there is just that difference of trying to deal with unmixed change inside the mix, right? So I think that's probably
and that's fixed in 2.0, right? There is no more change, right? So that's another reason why there is no XPub segregation or so. There's just a metadata segregation, right? But since there is no change anymore, at least in most cases, right? That's all right. You don't need to have proper segregation if all the block space, all the outputs that you get are fungible.
Right.
And then in terms to postmix tools, so Wasabi has the PayJoin sending capability, right? So if you want to send to BTC Pay or something, that works. Not yet receiving. That will come. There's actually an old PR that makes it work, but we didn't put much effort into it yet. And I guess this change avoidance can be considered as a post-mix privacy tool. However, there's no such thing as these, two-party coin joins or fake coin joins, because again, block space efficiency, and just having some small ambiguity, but needing to purchase, twice as much block space is a question of if that's actually worth it. And for me personally, I would like to obliterate the post-mix world in the sense, make every spend a coin join. Right? And you can do that in Wabi-Sabi again, right? You can register arbitrary amounts and nobody knows who registered it. So I think we're going to see payments in the Coinjoin, right? So that I'm a Wasabi user and you give me your address, and then I just put it into an output of the huge Coinjoin with exactly the amount that you would want to have. Right? I might need to be able to generate multiple addresses for you, right? Because Coinjoin rounds fail, and you don't want to reuse addresses across different rounds. And so I might need your XPub or at least some gap limit of multiple addresses, right? That's one thing. But the other thing that's even more exciting is payments inside a Coinjoin. I kind of call it pay to endpoint wabi-sabi. Right, so here we have a scenario where both Stephan and me are Wasabi Wallet users, or at least we understand the wabi-sabi Coinjoin protocol, and we talk to the same coordinator. And let's say I want to make a payment to Stephan. Now I register an input, not with Stephan, but I registered with the coordinator, right? So Nutor identity talks to the coordinator. I register my input, and now I get this my eCash credential, these key verified anonymous credentials, right? And let's say I registered 1 Bitcoin, so it's 1 Bitcoin worth, right? And now I can reissue this credential to myself, right? It's like an internal transfer in the eCash system, which has the anonymity set size of all the transactions that happen in the eCash system, right? So I just make one reissuance where I break up the 1 Bitcoin credential into 2 credentials worth 0.3 and 0.7, you know? And now I have a new credential that is 0.3, just a string of text. It's a signature, basically. And I can give that credential to Stephan, right? So for him, it's just some arbitrary looking gibberish, right? But he can now go to the coordinator and request
claim that.
Well, he first requests to reissue the credential too, right? So you present that 0.3 credential and you go to the coordinator and say, I would like a 0.2 and a 0.1, right? But we're actually using Pedersen commitments here, so the coordinator does not know the amounts that's happening. He just sees one credential gets presented and 2 get redeemed, right? He doesn't know the value in them, but he makes sure that outputs equal inputs, right? So this way now you have 2 new credentials, right, that nobody knows are yours, basically. And these credentials, again, give you access rights to write to the output side of the PSBT. And so during output registration now, you connect to the coordinator directly. You don't connect to me, but you connect to the coordinator. And you present him the 0.2 credential, and you say, please send it to this address. Right? Then you create a new Tor identity, and you present the 0.1 credential, right? And say, to this address, please.
And that's how I can kind of claim it from the coordinator, even if I'm not a Wasabi 2.0 user myself.
No, in this case, you have to be a Wasabi, or at least you need to understand Wabi-Sabi and talk to the same coordinator. It might happen in a different wallet if there's a BIP and a standard, right? But so that, and I do the same with my change output, right? I still get 0.7 back. So I break that down to 0.4 and 0.3 or something, you know, and I present those 2 coins,
right? Same way
to the coordinator. But now the crazy thing is, I just paid you money, right? But you have no idea which input coin I used. Right? I never sent that to you. It's one of hundreds of inputs on the Coinjoin. So you have no idea about my past transaction history. And I, as a sender, have no idea about the addresses or amounts that you just had. Right? So I don't know your address and therefore not your future transaction history. Right? So these are perfectly anonymous payments in the sense that neither the sender nor the receiver knows the pre and post mixed transaction history. Right? And the coordinator doesn't even know that that's going on. Right? For him, it's just a regular reissuance request. He doesn't know that someone passed the token to someone else. Right? And the best thing is, it works similar to PayJoin, that the receiver can also consolidate anonymously. Right? So you, Stephan, just register an input or a couple inputs at the coordinator. Then you get I register some inputs and I give you the amount credential of what I want to pay you. Right? But you already have some credentials, you know, from the 3 coins that you registered or something. Plus, you get my credential. And now you can consolidate those credentials, basically present 2 of them to the coordinator and turn them into 1. And you do that twice or 3 times, and then you have 1 credential with all the amounts, right? And that ends up being put onto the Bitcoin blockchain, right? So I like it might even be, and I don't know that you're consolidating, right? So I have literally no idea of neither the address nor the amount that you are receiving on the other side.
Yeah, interesting to see. Okay, so what's the timeline then for Wasabi 2.0 or Wabi-Sabi?
2 weeks, of course. I mean, so I think 4 weeks ago, we released the first testnet release candidate. I mean, the code was open source. You could have run it on mainnet since day one, right? But we would not encourage it yet. And we, ZKSnacks, do not run a coordinator on mainnet yet. And so we only have a Wabi-Sabi testnet coordinator, and I think we're the only one. Or no, actually, some people are testing with the coordinator too. So we're probably not the only one in testnet. And now a couple days ago, we released the second version of our release candidate. By the way, in that meantime, I think it was only 2 weeks, something like 110 pull requests got merged. Like that's what you get when 30 developers are working on some code, and that's what you get when you have a reputable long-term coordinator who earns a bunch of money. Right? You can actually pay people to focus full time on that. So we're making like some serious improvements here, and yeah, that's out. So go to the github.com/zksnacks/walletwasabi and scroll down. There's a pre-release version 2. And try it out. It's cool. It's not just the Coinjoin under the hood having been improved tremendously, but it's an entire new user interface. We have, I think, 3 of the maintainers of Avalonia, which is a UI framework, working full time on Wasabi, and they are kind of considering Wasabi to be one of the flagship products of Avalonia. So they really put a lot of love into it and make it look quite beautiful. Even master branches are already more advanced than our second testnet release candidate. So the UI is really pretty. And because Wasabi 2.0 is going to be so much more block space efficient and so much more cheaper for our users, we're now just happy to do it by default. Right? So whenever you send money into your Wasabi wallet and it confirms, those coins will be registered and automatically. You don't have to do anything, and it will just break down into smaller value coins that have some ambiguity. Right? And Wasabi will also now keep running in the background. Right? So by default, the GUI just minimizes basically, but the daemon keeps running in the background, rather resource light, hopefully. And then you can just opportunistically Coinjoin as long as you have your computer running, basically. And all of this together just makes it such a more simple UX. It's literally you receive money, you wait a couple hours, and then you spend money. You have no idea what happened in the meantime, but you can rest assured that your privacy is protected, that the person whom you're sending money to now has no idea how much money you earned in the past or from whom. And this is, I think, really one of the things that is just that led to a lot of user mistakes in 1.0 was that we offloaded a bunch of responsibility to the user in 1.0. Right? It was all based on manual coin selection and manual Coinjoin registration. Right? So by default, even though we have perfect privacy on Tor and network level with block filters, right? But by default, there was zero privacy on the Bitcoin base layer, right? On the blockchain, I mean, in Wasabi 1.0. Because the user, first of all, had to understand that there's a problem. Right? Sure, if you had a one unanswered coin, there was a red shield, but who cares, right? So nobody knows what that even means. And they need to know that there's a solution to that problem, which is known as Coinjoin. But what the fuck is a Coinjoin? No idea. So nobody knew that there was a problem, or few people knew that there was a problem. Few people knew the solution to the problem, and fewer still knew how to use the solution properly in the sense of not consolidating inputs and stuff, right? But we just offloaded a bunch of responsibility to the user, who are frankly the least educated and the least able to make those decisions. Right? I have no idea how to configure Tor properly. I just install the Tor browser and it works. But I don't need to know the details of what are circuits and streams and bridges and whatnot. It just works by default. And I think we've achieved that on mainnet, we've achieved that on the blockchain now. Right, that you actually don't need to care about what are UTXOs even. You just receive money and you spend it, right? And that's it. But because of the default Coinjoin and because of some things like the change avoidance and pocket selection and things like this, we can just abstract a lot of the complexities out of the wallet, right? And that's another thing that's quite controversial, because I'm a power user and I love to see all the details and be able to control my robot to its fullest extent. And Wasabi 2.0 is moving away from that direction, right? It doesn't try to be the next Electrum or Sparrow, right? It's really tries to be a wallet that everyone can use, and everyone can use privately by default without doxing all of your financial activity on the chain. Right? And I think that's a quite important goal. We're still probably far away from it. Like 2.0 is quite shitty. It's far from perfect on many levels, right? But I think it's a major leap and improvement in Bitcoin privacy wallet design in general. So as bad as it is, I'm still quite proud of it, of what we've actually achieved here. But I'm very certain that this is not the end. Like there is a whole bunch more things that can and will be improved. So it's definitely not going to be boring.
Okay, well, I'll have to have a look. I think it is one of those things where people are. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see what happens with that and see what happens in terms of chain surveillance or chain analysts in the community and privacy developers and privacy advocates say once they've had a chance to play around with it. So Max, thanks for joining me today, and we'll catch up some other time. And Max, where can people find you online?
Yeah, thanks, Stephan, for the invite. I think really good that we talked. And again, I don't think we disagree on much here. I just want to highlight there's a bunch of nuance here, right? And ultimately, that's why we have the free market. I think this is a win-win-win going to be for everyone. More services offered like this are a good thing. And ultimately, also, financial incentives are key. And if, you're going to pay 100 or 1,000 times more in fees with other solutions, that's going to be noticeable. So I'm super stoked that we improved efficiency of on-chain Coinjoins by such an extent, and the usability of them too. So yeah, I'm bullish on Bitcoin privacy more than I ever was before. Even though I'm not that happy with that decision ZKSnacks took. But yes, find me on Twitter at HillebrandMax, towardsliberty.com, my site for personal consultations and all other things. Was a pleasure speaking with you, Stephan. Let's keep in touch.
Thanks, Max.